chapter 13, page 54, of auxiliary mixed in one's own soldiers. Auxiliary arms, which are the other useless arms, are those of a power that is called to come with its arms to help and defend you, as was done by Pope Julius in recent times. When he had seen in the campaign of Ferrara the sad result of his mercenary arms, he turned to auxiliary ones, and he agreed with Ferdinand, King of Spain, that Ferdinand would help him with his men and armies. These arms can be useful and good in themselves, but for whoever calls them in, they are almost always harmful, because when they lose, you are undone. When they win, you are left their prisoner. And although ancient histories are full of examples, nonetheless I do not wish to depart from this recent example of Pope Julius II, whose course of thrusting himself entirely into the hands of a foreigner when he wanted Ferrara could not have been less thought out, but his good fortune gave rise to a third thing, so that he did not reap the fruit of his bad choice. For when his auxiliaries were defeated at Ravenna, the Swiss rose up, and beyond all expectation his own and others drove out the victors, and he came out a prisoner, neither of his enemies who had fled, nor of his auxiliaries, since he had won with other arms than theirs. The Florentines, who were entirely unarmed, brought in 10,000 French to Pisa to capture it, for which course they incurred more damage than in any other time of their travails. The Emperor of Constantinople, so as to oppose his neighbors, sent 10,000 Turks into Greece. When the war was finished, they refused to leave. This was the beginning of the servitude of Greece under the infidels. Let him, then, who wants to be unable to win, make use of these arms, since they are much more dangerous than mercenary arms. For with these, ruin is accomplished. They are all united, all resolved to obey someone else. But mercenary arms, when they have won, need more time and greater opportunity to hurt you, since they are not one whole body, and have been found and paid for by you. And then the third party, whom you may put at their head, cannot quickly seize so much authority as to offend you. In mercenary arms, laziness is more dangerous. In auxiliary arms, virtue is. A wise prince, therefore, has always avoided these arms and turned to his own. He has preferred to lose with his own than to win with others, since he judges it no true victory that is acquired with alien arms. I shall never hesitate to cite Caesar Borgia and his actions. This duke came into Romagna with auxiliary arms, leading their entirely French troops, with whom he took Imola and Forli. But when such arms no longer appeared safe to him, he turned to mercenaries, judging there to be less danger in them. And he hired the Orsini and Vitelli. Then in managing them, he found them doubtful, unfaithful, and dangerous. He eliminated them and turned to his own arms. And one can easily see the difference between these arms if one considers what a difference there was in the reputation of the Duke when he had only the French, when he had the Orsini and Vitelli, and when he was left with his own soldiers and himself over them. His reputation will be found always to have increased, but he was never so much esteemed as when everyone saw that he was the total owner of his arms. I did not want to depart from examples that are Italian and recent, yet I do not want to leave out Hiero of Syracuse, Hiero, since he was one of those named above me. When he, as I said, was made head of the army by the Syracusians, he knew immediately that their mercenary military was not useful, because they were condottieri, set up like our Italians. Since he thought he could neither keep them nor let them go, he had them all cut to pieces, and then made war with his arms and not with alien arms. I want further to recall a memory, a figure of the Old Testament apt for this purpose. When David offered to Saul to go and fight Goliath, the Philistine challenger, Saul, to give him spirit, armed him with his own guns, which David, as soon as he had them on, refused, saying that with them he could not give a good account of himself, and so he would rather meet the enemy with his sling and his knife. In fine, the arms of others either fall off your back or weigh you down or hold you tight. Charles VII, father of King Louis XI, who had liberated France from the English with his fortune and virtue, recognized this necessity of arming himself with his own arms, and laid down an ordinance in his kingdom for men at arms and infantry. Then his son King Louis eliminated the ordinance for infantry and began to hire Swiss. This error, continued by others, is as one sees now, in fact, the cause of the dangers to that kingdom. When he gave reputation to the Swiss, he debased all his own arms because he had eliminated the infantry entirely, and he had obligated his men at arms to the arms of others. For after they had become accustomed to fighting with Swiss, they did not think they could win without them. From this it follows that French are not enough against Swiss, and without Swiss do not try against anyone else. Thus the armies of France have been mixed, part mercenary, part their own. These arms altogether are much better than simple auxiliary or simple mercenary arms, but much inferior to one's own, and the example given is enough, because the kingdom of France would be unconquerable if the ordering of Charles had been expanded or preserved. But lack of prudence in men begins something in which, because it tastes good then, they do not perceive the poison that lies underneath, as I said above, of consumptive fevers. Therefore, he who does not recognize evils when they arise in a principality is not truly wise, and this is given to few. And if one considers the first cause of the ruin of the Roman Empire, one will find it to have begun only with the hiring of Goths, because that was the beginning. The forces of the Roman Empire, from that beginning, the forces of the Roman Empire began to weaken, and all the virtue that was taken from it was given to them. I conclude thus that without its own arms no principality is secure. Indeed, it is wholly obliged to fortune, since it does not have virtue to defend itself in adversity. And it has always been the opinion and judgment of wise men that nothing is so infirm and unstable as fame for power not sustained by one's own force. And one's own arms are those which are composed of either subjects or citizens or your creatures. All others are either mercenary or auxiliary. And the mode of ordering one's own arms will be easy to find if one reviews the orders of the four I have named above, and if one sees how Philip, father of Alexander the Great, and how many republics and princes have armed and ordered themselves. I submit myself entirely to these orders. Page 58, chapter 14. What a prince should do regarding the military. Thus a prince should have no other object, nor any other thought, nor take anything else as his art, but that of war, and its orders and discipline, for that is the only art which is of concern to one who commands, and it is of such virtue that not only does it maintain those who have been born princes, but many times it enables men of private fortune to rise to that rank. And on the contrary, one sees that when princes have thought more of amenities than of arms, they have lost their states, and the first cause that makes you lose it is the neglect of this art, and the cause that enables you to acquire it is to be a professional in this art. For in Sforza, because he was armed, became Duke of Milan from a private individual, and his sons, because they shunned the hardships of arms, became private individuals from dukes. For among the other causes of evil that being unarmed brings you, it makes you contemptible, which is one of those infamies that princes should be on guard against, as will be said below. For there is no proportion between one who is armed and one who is unarmed, and it is not reasonable that whoever is armed obey willingly whoever is unarmed, and that someone unarmed be secure among armed servants. For since there is scorn in the one and suspicion in the other, it is not possible for them to work well together, and therefore a prince who does not understand the military, besides other unhappiness, cannot, as was said, be esteemed by his soldiers, nor have trust in them. Therefore, he should never lift his thoughts from the exercise of war, and in peace he should exercise it more than in war. This he could do in two modes, one with deeds, the other with the mind. As to deeds, besides keeping his armies well ordered and exercised, he should always be out hunting, and through this accustom the body to hardships. And meanwhile, he should learn the nature of sights and recognize how mountains rise, how valleys open up, how plains lie, and understand the nature of rivers and marshes, and in this invest the greatest care. This knowledge is useful in two modes. First, one learns to know one's own country, and one can better understand its defense. Then, through the knowledge of and experience with those sites, one can comprehend with ease every other site that it may be necessary to explore as new. For the hills, the valleys, the plains, the rivers, the marshes that are in Tuscany, for example, have a certain similarity to those of other provinces, so that from the knowledge of a site in one province One can easily come to the knowledge of others, and the prince who lacks the skill lacks the first part of what a captain must have, for this teaches him to find the enemy, seize lodgings, lead armies, order battles, and besiege towns to your advantage. Among other praise given by writers to Philopoemen, prince of the Achaeans, is that in times of peace he never thought of anything but modes of war, and when he was on campaign with friends, he often stopped and reasoned with them. If the enemy were on top of that hill and we were here with our army, which of us would have the advantage? How could one advance to meet them while maintaining order? If we wanted to retreat from here, how would we have to do it? If they retreated, how would we have to follow them? And he put before them as he went along all the chances that can occur to an army. He listened to their opinions, gave his own, supported it with reason, so that because of these continued cogitations there could never arise. While he led the army, any accident for which he did not have the remedy, but as to the exercise of the mind, a prince should read histories, and considering them the actions of excellent men, should see how they conducted themselves in wars, should examine the causes of the victories and losses, so as to be able to avoid the latter and imitate the former. Above all, he should do as some excellent man has done in the past, who found someone to imitate, who had been praised and glorified before him, whose exploits and actions he always kept beside himself. As they say, Alexander the Great imitated Achilles, Caesar, Alexander, Scipio, Cyrus, and whoever reads the life of Cyrus, written by Xenophon, will then recognize in the life of Scipio how much glory that imitation brought him, how much in chastity, affability, humanity, and liberality Scipio conformed to what has been written of Cyrus by Xenophon. A wise prince should observe such modes and never remain idle in peaceful times, but with his industry make capital of them in order to be able to profit from them in adversities, so that when fortune changes, it will find him ready to resist them. Chapter 15 of those things for which men, and especially princes, are praised or blamed. Page 61, chapter 15. It remains now to see what the modes and government of a prince should be with subjects and with friends, and because I know that many have written of this, I fear that in writing of it again I may be held presumptuous, especially since in disputing this matter I depart from the orders of others. But since my intent is to write something useful to whoever understands it, it has appeared to me more fitting to go directly to the effectual truth of the thing than to the imagination of it. And many have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in truth, i.e., go fuck yourself, Plato. For it is so far from how one lives to how one should live that he who lets go of what is done for what should be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation. For a man who wants to make a profession of good in all regards must come to ruin among so many who are not good. Hence it is necessary to a prince, if he wants to maintain himself, to learn to be able not to be good, and to use this and not use it according to necessity. Thus, leaving out what is imagined about a prince and discussing what is true, I say that all men, whenever one speaks of them, and especially princes, since they are placed higher, are noted for some of the qualities that bring them either blame or praise. And this is why someone who is considered liberal, someone mean, using the Tuscan term, because avaro, greed, in our language is still one who desires to have something by rapine. Misero, mean, we call one who refrains too much from using what is his. Someone who is considered a giver, someone rapacious, someone cruel, someone merciful, the one a breaker of faith, the other faithful, the one effeminate and pusillanimous, the other fierce and spirited. You pusillanimous motherfucker. The other fierce and spirited, the one humane, the other proud, the one lascivious, the other chaste, the one honest, the other astute, the one hard, the other agreeable, the one grave, the other light, the one religious, the other unbelieving, and the like. I know that everyone will confess that it will be a very praiseworthy thing to find in a prince all the above mentioned qualities that are held good, but because he cannot have them nor wholly observe them, since human conditions do not permit it, it is necessary for him to be so prudent as to know how to avoid the infamy of those vices that would take his state from him, and to be on guard against those that do not, if that is possible. But if one cannot, one can let them go on with less hesitation. And furthermore, one should not care about incurring the fame of those vices without which it is difficult to save one's state. For if one considers everything well, one will find something appears to be virtue, which, if pursued, would be one's ruin, and something else appears to be vice, which, if pursued, results in one's security and well-being. Of liberality and parsimony. Chapter 16. 62. Beginning then with the first of the above-mentioned qualities, I say that it would be good to be held liberal. Nonetheless, liberality, when used so that you may be held liberal, hurts you. For if it is used virtuously, and it should be used, it may not be recognized, and you will not escape the infamy of its contrary. And so, if one wants to maintain a name for liberality among men, it is necessary not to leave out any kind of lavish display, so that a prince who has done this will always consume all his resources in such deeds. In the end, it will be necessary, if he wants to maintain a name for liberality, to burden the people extraordinarily, to be rigorous with taxes, and to do all those things that can be done to get money. This will begin to make him hated by his subjects and little esteemed by anyone as he becomes poor. So, having offended the many and rewarded the few with this liberality of his, he feels every least hardship and runs into risk at every slight danger. When he recognizes this and wants to draw back from it, he immediately incurs the infamy of meanness. Thus, since a prince cannot, without damage to himself, use the virtue of liberality so that it is recognized, he should not, if he is prudent, care about a name for meanness. For with time he will always be held more and more liberal, when it is seen that with his parsimony, his income is enough for him, that he can defend himself from whoever makes war on him, and that he can undertake campaigns without burdening the people. So he comes to use liberality with all those from whom he does not take, who are infinite, and meanness with all those to whom he does not give, who are few. In our times we have not seen great things done except by those who have been considered mean. The others have been eliminated. Pope Julius II, while he made use of a name for liberality to attain the papacy, do not think of maintaining it later so as to be able to make war. The present King of France has carried on many wars without imposing an extraordinary tax on his subjects, only because the extra expenses were administered with his long-practiced parsimony. If the present King of Spain had been held liberal, he would not have been able to make or win so many campaigns. Therefore, so as not to have to rob his subjects, to be able to defend himself, not to become poor and contemptible, nor to be forced to become rapacious, a prince should esteem it little to incur a name for meanness, because this is one of those vices which enable him to rule. And if someone should say Caesar attained empire with liberality, and many others, because they have been held to be liberal, have attained a very great rank, I respond, either you are already a prince, or you are on the path to acquiring it. In the first case, this liberality is damaging. In the second, it is indeed necessary to be held liberal. And Caesar was one of those who wanted to attain the Principate of Rome, but if, after he had arrived there, had he remained alive and not been temperate with his expenses, he would have destroyed that empire. And if someone should reply, many have been princes and have done great things with their armies who have been held very liberal, I respond to you, either the prince spends from what is his own and his subjects, or from what belongs to someone else. In the first case, he should be sparing. In the other, he should not leave out any part of liberality. And for the prince who goes out with his armies, who feeds on booty, pillage, and ransom, and manages on what belongs to someone else, this liberality is necessary. Otherwise, he would not be followed by his soldiers, and of what is not yours or your subjects, one can be a bigger giver, as were Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander, because spending what is someone else's does not take reputation from you, but adds it to you. Only spending your own is what harms you, and there is nothing that consumes itself as much as liberality. While you use it, you lose the capacity to use it, and you become either poor and contemptible, or to escape poverty, rapacious and hateful. Among all the things that a prince should guard against is being contemptible and hated, and liberality leads you to both. So there is more wisdom in maintaining a name for meanness, which besets infamy without hatred, than in being under a necessity because one wants to have a name for liberality to incur a name for rapacity, which begets infamy with hatred. Coming up, page 65, chapter 17 of Cruelty and Mercy, and whether it is better to be loved than feared, or the contrary. Coming up soon, little prince, little